Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
There was a small KFC off a rural highway in Ohio, the kind of place you'd only notice if you were desperate for food on a long drive. It had the same fluorescent lights, grease-stained counters, and faint smell of fryer oil you'd expect, but locals whispered about strange things happening there after dark. Most of them wouldn't eat there at all. In the fall of 2006, a college student named Brian stopped there on his way home from a late-night drive. He was hungry, exhausted, and the glowing red sign was the only thing open for miles. When he walked in, the place was strangely empty, not just of customers but of noise. The fryers hummed, the heat lamps buzzed, but no one stood at the counter. He rang the little service bell, and after a long pause, a man in a grease-stained uniform appeared. His face was pale, slick with sweat, and his eyes never seemed to focus directly on Brian. Without speaking, the man handed him a menu and waited. Brian ordered a 2-piece meal, and the worker nodded silently before disappearing into the kitchen. What unsettled him was the way the man moved, jerky, like his limbs weren't quite right, as if he was mimicking how a person should walk. After several minutes of silence, Brian heard a wet chopping sound from the back, followed by a metallic clang. He assumed it was the cook preparing his order, but the noise kept going, chopping, dragging, chopping. When the man returned, he set the tray down hard in front of him. The chicken pieces looked darker than usual, almost gray, with a faintly sour smell, but Brian's hunger overpowered his hesitation. He ate quickly, trying not to taste the strange bitterness in the meat. That's when he noticed the worker staring at him, not blinking, not even shifting, just watching. Brian forced down the last bite, left his trash on the table, and turned to leave. As he walked toward the exit, he heard the worker whisper something under his breath. He couldn't make out the words, but it made his skin crawl. When he pushed open the door and stepped into the cool night, he swore he saw shapes moving in the unlit corners of the dining area, like more people had been sitting there in the dark the whole time, their outlines barely visible. The drive home was brutal. His stomach began cramping so badly, he had to pull over twice. By the time he got back to his apartment, he was pale and shaking, drenched in cold sweat. He barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. What came up wasn't just food. It was thick, stringy, and dark, with pieces that didn't look like chicken at all. His roommate rushed him to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't identify what he had eaten. They just said his stomach lining had been damaged, almost like he had ingested raw flesh. For weeks afterward, Brian couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the worker's expressionless face and those shadowy figures in the dining area. When he finally worked up the nerve to tell someone, he tried going back to the KFC to prove it had happened. But when he drove out to that stretch of highway, there was nothing there. No building, no sign, not even a foundation. Just an empty patch of cracked asphalt and weeds, like the place had never existed. To this day, Brian swears the food didn't taste like chicken, and he'll never set foot in a KFC again. Some locals say that building shows up every now and then on lonely roads, but only for certain unlucky travelers. They say if you eat there, you're not eating fried chicken. You're eating something else, something that stays inside you long after the meal is over.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 2.
There was a man named Terrence who worked the night shift at a KFC off the highway in Kentucky. The store stayed open until 2 a.m., and by midnight it was usually empty, except for the occasional trucker grabbing food before the long drive ahead. Terrence hated the quiet hours. When the hum of the fryers was the only sound filling the building, he often felt like someone was watching him. He brushed it off as exhaustion from his double shifts, until one night proved it was more than paranoia. It started around 1:30 a.m. when a beat-up sedan pulled into the parking lot. The headlights flickered off, but no one came in. The car just sat there facing the restaurant, engine silent, windows dark. Terrence kept glancing at it while cleaning the fryers, waiting for whoever was inside to get out. Nobody did. After 20 minutes, he noticed the car was gone, not because he saw it leave, but because he looked up and it simply wasn't there anymore. He went back to work, trying to shake off the unease. But as he carried the trash bags to the dumpster behind the building, he froze. The same car was parked right by the dumpster, hidden in the shadows, its trunk slightly cracked open. The driver's door was ajar, but again, no one was in sight. He didn't hear it pull up. No engine, no tires on gravel, just silence. Terrence backed into the store quickly and locked the door, heart pounding. He told himself he wasn't going back outside until his shift was over. But at 1:55 a.m., the drive-through headset crackled with static, and then a voice, low, almost whispering, came through. "The chicken smells good tonight." He dropped the headset like it burned him. The system wasn't supposed to work unless someone pressed the speaker button at the drive-through menu outside. He slowly turned to the monitors showing the camera feed from the drive-through. What he saw made his stomach turn to ice. The car was back in the drive-through lane, but the trunk wasn't cracked open anymore. It was wide open. Inside, illuminated by the red glow of the taillights, was what looked like a woman's arm hanging limp over the edge. Terrence's hands shook as he reached for the phone to call the police. But before he could dial, every light in the restaurant flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. The only sound was the fryer oil bubbling, as though someone had just dropped food into it. When the lights came back seconds later, the car was gone. The trunk, the arm, the driver, everything. Terrence quit that night. He never went back for his final paycheck. But when he told his manager what had happened, she went pale and said this wasn't the first time. Workers from years ago had reported the same car, the same trunk, the same voice over the drive-through. None of them lasted long either. Even today, locals say if you drive past that KFC after midnight, you might see the car sitting there in the lot with its trunk cracked open, waiting for someone who stays too late inside.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 3.
There was a small Kentucky Fried Chicken off the highway in a rural town, the kind of place that only stayed open because it was the only fast food stop for miles. On a rainy night in 2014, a man named Daniel pulled in after a long drive. The lot was nearly empty, and the building looked tired. Its fluorescent lights flickered, and the giant bucket sign out front groaned as the wind pushed against it. Inside, there was only one worker visible at the counter, a young woman who didn't greet him, just stared with wide, dark circles under her eyes. Daniel ordered a simple meal, chicken, mashed potatoes, and a soda, and sat near the back where he could hear the hum of the fryers. Not long after he started eating, he noticed something strange. The taste of the chicken was off. It wasn't the usual greasy crunch, but oddly metallic, with a strange bitter aftertaste. He tried to ignore it, thinking maybe the fryer oil hadn't been changed, but the smell coming from the kitchen made his stomach twist. It wasn't the familiar scent of fried chicken. It was sharper, sour, like rotting meat covered with bleach. Daniel was about to throw the food away when he heard a sound from the kitchen, a low moaning that rose and fell like someone in pain. He looked up, expecting to see another worker emerge, but the girl at the counter stood frozen, staring at him as if daring him to ask about it. The moaning grew louder, and then there was a sudden bang, like a body slamming against a metal door. Daniel froze. The girl finally spoke in a flat, exhausted voice. "You should go." But curiosity got the better of him. He stood, walking toward the kitchen door, when she suddenly screamed, "Don't open it!" Her voice cracked with genuine terror. He stopped, but in that moment of hesitation, the door behind the counter pushed open on its own, swinging just enough for him to see inside. What he saw didn't make sense at first. There were raw chickens hanging from hooks, but they weren't just chickens. Some had limbs, small and malformed, like half-developed human arms fused with feathers and skin. One of them twitched. Another let out the same low moan he had heard earlier, the sound bubbling from a throat that should not have existed. The stench rolled out of the room so strong it burned his eyes. The girl slammed the door shut before he could see more, breathing hard like she'd just run a mile. She whispered, "We can't throw them away. They always come back. The company says to keep cooking them, no matter what." Her hands shook as she spoke, grease and sweat dripping from her uniform sleeves. Daniel bolted out the door, leaving his food and drink behind. He swore he'd never eat KFC again. On his drive home, The taste of that metallic chicken lingered in his mouth, and later that night he woke up vomiting until he thought he would choke. Weeks later, he still couldn't get rid of the memory of those things hanging in the kitchen. When he tried to look up complaints about that location online, he found nothing. No reviews, no closure notices, as if it had never existed at all. Some people in that town say the KFC burned down years ago and that nothing has stood there since. But travelers swear, every once in a while on stormy nights, they see the neon glow of the Colonel's face flickering in the dark, and if you pull into the lot, the restaurant is still there, waiting. The smell of fried chicken leaks out, mixed with something fouler, something that doesn't belong on any menu.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 4.
There was a KFC off a busy interstate in Tennessee that the locals still whisper about. On the surface, it was just another fried chicken joint, but employees swore something was wrong inside that building long before it made the news. It started small. Cooks would find the fryers still bubbling when the power had been cut for the night. The walk-in freezer would lock from the inside, trapping workers until someone heard their fists pounding against the metal. One night, a teenage cashier swore she saw a man in a grease-stained uniform standing in the dining room after closing, but when she called out, he vanished. She thought it was exhaustion, but she wasn't the only one who saw him. In 2003, the restaurant made headlines after a bizarre tragedy. A customer went into the restroom and never came out. When workers finally forced the door open, they found him slumped in the corner, his skin gray, his eyes wide and bloodshot. The strange part? He wasn't holding his chest or gasping for air. He was pointing at the mirror. On the surface of the glass, there were greasy handprints smeared across it, but they didn't match his. Health inspectors shut the place down temporarily, but nothing explained what happened. When it reopened, things got worse. Customers would complain of a foul odor drifting from the kitchen, something sharper than spoiled chicken. Employees swore they saw shadows moving under the fluorescent lights, darting across the walls even when no one else was around. One night, a delivery driver dropped off a shipment of frozen chicken and swore he heard screaming inside the freezer. He refused to go back, telling the manager, "There's something alive in there." The manager laughed it off until the next morning when they found every box of chicken shredded open, bones scattered across the floor as if gnawed by human teeth. The final straw came in 2007. A closing crew of 3 never made it out. Police were called after families reported them missing. The restaurant was locked from the outside, lights still humming. When officers broke in, fryers were running, grease popping and spitting. The register drawer was open, bills soaking in something dark. In the freezer, they found one employee curled up, rocking and whispering, her hair frozen to the steel wall. The other 2 were gone. No footprints, no blood trail, nothing. That KFC never reopened. The building still stands, gutted and boarded up. Though travelers sometimes swear they see the lights flicker on inside when they drive past late at night. Truckers have claimed they can smell burnt grease drifting from the abandoned lot, and some say if you look in the right window, you'll see a figure standing behind the counter, waiting with something dripping from its hands. The franchise tried to erase it from memory, but in that town, everyone knows the story. They say the place isn't haunted by ghosts, it's haunted by the building itself. Something rotten soaked deep into the grease and tiles, something that refuses to die.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 5.
There's a story that has floated around for years among fast food workers, especially those who've worked late-night shifts at KFC. A lot of people dismiss it as rumor, but there are enough accounts from different towns that it makes you wonder if it's more than just a ghost story. Back in the early 2000s, a KFC in a small Midwestern town started getting complaints from customers about a strange chemical taste in the chicken. At first, managers blamed it on fryer oil that hadn't been changed, or cleaning solution that might have been left behind on trays. But the complaints kept piling up. People would say they felt dizzy after eating, their throats burned, and a few even said they vomited blood hours later. The health inspector came through twice, but nothing showed up in the tests. Everything was up to code. One night, a closing shift employee swore he saw something through the grease-stained window into the back freezer. He said a tall, pale man was standing there, watching. But when he unlocked the door and flicked on the lights, no one was inside. What he did notice, though, was that the raw chicken boxes had been torn open, not cut, not ripped like an animal would, but shredded, as if by hands with long nails. The meat inside wasn't spoiled, but it carried a strange metallic smell. He refused to finish his shift and never came back. Another worker, a high school girl on drive-thru, recalled a customer pulling up around 11:30 one night. The man was thin, with skin so white it reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. He ordered only one thing, a bucket of chicken. She took his cash, handed him the food, and noticed his fingernails, long, yellowed, curling like claws. When she looked back out the window seconds later, the car was gone, not even taillights down the empty road. The security camera showed the order being taken, her handing over the bag, but no car ever in the lane. A month later, the night manager was found dead in the walk-in freezer. He had clocked out but hadn't left the building. They said his body was crouched in the corner, eyes wide open, and his skin had a bluish-gray tint like he'd been frozen for days, even though he'd only been missing a few hours. The security footage from that night cut out around midnight, replaced with static. When the police recovered fragments of the tape, it showed the manager standing at the fryer, staring off at something beyond the camera. In the reflection of the grease-spattered stainless steel, you could just barely make out a gaunt face, grinning. That location shut down and never reopened, but employees from other KFCs swear they've seen the same man. Sometimes it's just a glimpse in the drive-thru camera, sometimes it's a reflection in the fryers, and sometimes when they're closing, they'll hear the freezer door creak open on its own, the faint smell of metal drifting out. People say it's a curse, that something is wrong with the supply chain, something buried in the meat itself. Others say it's him, the pale man, following the chicken wherever it goes. No one knows for sure, but ask around long enough and you'll find someone who swears that late at night when the lights are buzzing and the fryers are cooling down, they felt him watching.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 6.
There's a story that circulates among people who have worked night shifts at a certain KFC in the Midwest. And while management insists it's just a rumor, the employees who lived through it swear it really happened. It was a small KFC off the interstate, the kind of place that never really closes because of the constant flow of truckers and late-night travelers. One evening, just before closing, a group of employees were cleaning up when the manager noticed something strange on the security monitor. One of the cameras pointed toward the walk-in freezer had gone fuzzy, static washing over the screen in short bursts. He sent one of the younger workers, a college kid named Chris, to check it out. Chris reluctantly went, carrying a mop handle like a weapon. Minutes passed and he didn't return. Another employee went back there, only to come sprinting out pale and stammering that the freezer door was wide open, the light inside flickering, but Chris was nowhere to be seen. At first, they thought he was hiding as a joke, until they noticed the streaks on the floor, long, wet drag marks leading into the freezer. The air was so cold it bit into their skin, but the most unnerving part was the smell. Freezers have that sharp, sterile chill, but this one smelled wrong. A sour, metallic stench that didn't belong in a place meant to store food. The manager called for Chris over the intercom, but the sound system only produced a crackling hiss, followed by what they swore sounded like faint breathing. They panicked, slammed the freezer shut, and locked it. But the lock began to rattle from the inside, as if someone or something was trying to get out. They could hear muffled thuds against the metal, not frantic banging, but slow, deliberate knocks. When the police were finally called, they searched the freezer thoroughly. Chris was gone. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, nothing but the half-frozen drag marks that stopped abruptly at the center of the floor. The cameras showed only static during the time he went missing. Officially, it was ruled as a disappearance unrelated to the restaurant. Off the record, the officers told the employees to quit if they could. The store still operates to this day. New hires are told not to linger near the freezer, and everyone swears that if you stand too close at night, You'll hear scratching from the inside, even when it's empty. Customers sometimes complain about a strange taste in the chicken, a faint coppery tang that can't be explained. The employees don't talk about it, but they all know what they believe, that Chris never left the freezer and something else has taken his place.